Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome everybody back to another video today on the channel. Today we've got 100 tips and tricks to learn everything in Rogue Company. Now this video is going to serve as a little bit of an ultimate guide or a resource that you can always come back and refer to if you're just starting on the game, or if you haven't been playing Rogue Company for a while and you're looking for a few more tips to up your game and become a bit more of a proficient player. These tips are going to range anywhere from some of the most fundamental core elements of the game to some very specific tips that I would argue that most players probably don't know about. So we're going to cover the entire spectrum today, and I think you guys are going to find this useful. So if you do end up enjoying today's video, I took a lot of time to make this. I would really appreciate a like rating. It is absolutely free. And of course, make sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel as well, as around 88% of you guys are not currently subscribed, and plenty more Rogue Company videos to come out on this channel. The support has been absolutely unbelievable recently. So to all of you guys who have helped to maintain and support this momentum of the channel going forward, I am very appreciative for you. But anyways, we're going to get through these tips very quickly, 100 tips and tricks for Rogue Company. And without further ado, guys, let's get started. Number 100 is going to be to really buckle down and main a rogue. And this is more specifically for newer players who are just picking up the game. You might not know which character to start out with, but I recommend you pick only one to really get their fundamentals down. This is going to help you understand the ins and outs of not only your character, but it will make things a little bit more simplified so you can understand the other characters going forward and you can watch interactions more. But main a rogue, figure out one which complements your playstyle the best, and then go from there. Tip number 99 is going to be disable motion blur, and this can be found in your settings. It is quite literally one of the worst settings that video game developers seem to implement in just about every game these days. I strongly recommend you disable it, as it might look more cinematic or whatever with it on and look kind of nice from an aesthetic standpoint. It is going to hurt your gameplay in a few ways. It could cause you to drop frames, or you might just miss crucial information that was otherwise blurred by the motion blur had you had that setting off. So I highly recommend you take this off, and you probably won't even miss it at all. 98 is going to be proficient at utilizing your camera movement, because this is your main tool of navigating the map and spotting out enemies. Your camera, based on your angle, is single-handedly the most determining factor in whether you get picked off or may not lose a gunfight. Because you're in third-person perspective, it's important to know where your enemy is coming from first before they can see you, and vice versa. This is the crux of your toolkit that's going to determine in a large part success in your game. 97 is going to be somewhat determining what rogues you're going to run based on the map you're playing. In my opinion, there are certain rogues and compositions of teams that work better on different maps and game modes for that matter as well. The thing is, on generally speaking more open maps with higher lines of sight, snipers and more long-range combat rogues are going to perform better. On more close-range ones, you know, you might want like SMG players and a Lancer and stuff like that, but the point is being nuanced enough to select rogues based on the map you're playing as well, and the team composition that's going to work well in that arena. 96 is going to be use the number prompts on screen to call out damage to teammates. This is especially effective if you're communicating, and if you have high-powered weapons where you can determine how much damage you are outputting, and you can give your teammates a visual indicator of how much HP your enemy may or may not have left. This is crucial in playmaking, as oftentimes the amount of damage you put out will determine whether you should push or play back. So you should always pay attention and communicate how much damage you're outputting. 95 is a more general tip, but this is only taking fights that your rogue can handle, so to speak. So these are going to be based on rogue to rogue interactions, as well as some lines of sight and map links and stuff like that. There are some interactions in some fights that you just aren't cut out for, right? That you shouldn't take. Like, for example, if you're Phantom and you're extremely up close with like a Chalk or a Lancer that is going to absolutely maul you in close range, you might want to not take that fight, or retreat if you can, or call it out to a teammate to help you out, something like that. But you know, regardless, if you're at long range, then potentially that's the fight that you are cut out for. So taking ones that you know you can handle is also important, and retreating from the ones that you can't and not egoing it out. 94 is going to be to move with teammates to pick up their trades. So oftentimes your teammate will hit an enemy, they'll get picked off, but the enemy is low HP. You have to go in and clean up that kill, otherwise your teammate died for nothing. 93 is knowing when to revive. Now, when someone goes down, it's not always the smartest option to immediately pick them up. They need to be in a safe spot out of lines of sight, typically behind cover where their head is not peeking out. That is the only way you can get a safe res, as well as listening for footsteps if somebody is pushing your revive. Number 92 is something I see new players doing all the time, and that is bleeding out early. Like, as soon as you go down, they just hold F or whatever to instantly bleed out. That's not a good idea, and even in Strikeout or Demolition, that's going to cost your teams a lot of lives. It's not good. The only time you need to respawn quickly is if the enemy is making a push, and you need to keep applying pressure, and there's no hope of being revived. But other than that, make sure you play your life and bleed it out. 91 is going to be to get familiar with your buy menu, and this is a little bit rogue dependent, right? But you want to have a general plan and action of what you're going to pick up and why you're getting it, and sort of get into a habit of getting the proper stuff for the matchups and particular map you're on as well. 90 is going to be to buy perks that exploit your enemy's weakness. After a round or two, if you notice your enemies aren't buying perks to avoid being revealed, start getting the perk that every time you tag them, it shows them through walls. This is extremely effective, and if they're not counterplaying this is an easy way to essentially break pressure. Tip number 89, in my opinion, it's always necessary to have a healer in respawn modes. This either means you're going to want one Saint or one Dahlia, pretty much always in a strikeout or an extraction mode, just because healers are truly the way to victory in these. If you actually want to get wins, you need a healer, because it is in large part lives dependent, and that's going to be your lifeline, so to speak. 88 is going to be pay attention to footsteps, as they are extremely audible in this game. You don't even need to have your volume up that loud to get context clues on where your enemy's coming from, and you can even really tell if they're below or above you in a lot of cases. So listening for footsteps and using that as context, you can even tell how many enemies there are, is extremely useful for your communication. 87 is going to be to turn your textures and settings all the way down. Now, this is pretty much only useful if like your device or whatever can't really run the game super well and you're dropping frames. Some people also say that it's just going to make enemies easier to see. There's less clutter and detail. Your game's not going to look as pretty, but some people think it helps performance. So if that is your case, potentially try doing that. 86, only buy one primary gun per game and focus in on that. If you're swapping between the two primaries, you can't use both, obviously, and wasting money on both of them in regards to not getting other perks is really going to hurt you in the long run. So pick one, and I would say commit to it. 85, in that weapon category, I would also strongly recommend fully upgrading your pistol regardless of the game mode pretty early on, as your sidearm is pretty much your only other lifeline if something happens to your primary. 84 is going to be experimenting with 3D audio. Now, this is an experimental setting right now in Rogue Company, and to be honest, I've used it a little bit, but I don't know if I'm really about it right now. It makes the audio a little bit more dynamic, and it's interesting, but sometimes the audio is rather confusing, and if that ends up being like, tweaked in the future, it might be an amazing setting, but definitely try it out and see if it's for you. 83 is going to be using your ping indicator. This is extremely valuable for calling out enemies, and especially if you don't have actual voice comms to teammates to let them know where danger might be. 82 is a little technique with Phantom you can do. If you're under pressure in an up-close gunfight scenario, you can drop your smoke grenade on yourself in order to get away. It doesn't need to be to spot out enemies, but you can drop it on yourself to conceal and then get out of the situation. 81 is understanding your weapon's strengths and weaknesses. This will come with a lot of game time once you play around with the entire arsenal in Rogue Company. You figure out what works and what doesn't in different scenarios, and really applying that knowledge into your game will help your decision making exponentially. 80 has a lot to do with game awareness. Listening out for Ronin's knife on the battlefield is pretty much the only way to detect if you're about to die from it. It can be heard from pretty far away, so you want to make sure that if you hear that beeping, then you don't get too close to the source. 79 is to choose your reloads wisely. Now, there are some situations in Rogue Company where a reload is going to cost you your life. This can be remedied a little bit by having the perk that allows you to reload faster, but you really need to pick and choose when is an appropriate time to reload and when you should really hold it out. 78 is going to be to not peek while crouching. Even if you go to peek over cover to look at your enemy and just see where they are, you expose your body to, gunfire, and you really just want to stay crouched behind cover and use your camera to scope them out rather than anything else. 77, you can tell when the fixer is using his ability, as his eyes will glow blue. This is extremely useful, especially if smoke grenades come out, so you know to stay away from that area as he'll be able to see you. 76 is going to be to pretty much always flush a chalk player if you down them, because they do have that self-revive ability, and oftentimes it's not even worth the risk, so you want to just take them out as quickly as possible. I don't recommend this on all characters, but specifically on chalk, you generally want to finish them off. 75, speaking of chalk, you can roll while you're downed as this character. I don't see a lot of people taking advantage of that. I don't think a lot of people know that he can even do it. You can dodge roll while you're downed as him, and this is so useful for getting to cover and getting self-revives in as well. 74 is not using your self-res ability as chalk every single time. If you're surrounded by 4 enemies, it's probably best not to use it because you'll end up wasting, as they will finish you off. But if you're safe and enemies have been cleared out, go ahead and revive yourself. It's up to your discretion though. 73, differently to chalk, you should pretty much always use Saint's drone, as he doesn't get punished if a res doesn't come off. If you get killed while the robot is reviving you, you don't really get punished for that at all. 72, while playing as Vi, use her toxic pools to force mistakes. If you tag somebody, they go around a corner, put a toxic pool there, and generally most players are going to panic and freak out, jump out of cover, and you can easily get the pick. 71 is going to be to use yourself as a body shield when downed. When you're in front of your reviver facing towards the enemy, sometimes the bullets, you're going to absorb a few, letting you get those few milliseconds that can end up getting you back on your feet. 70 is going to use your throwing of your melee weapons to cover close range. I know that sounds obvious, but a really good strategy is to hold a corner, wait for your enemy to push, and literally just throw a melee weapon as they come around the corner. Pretty much guarantees an insta-kill and is extremely effective if done properly. 69 is to observe your enemies as they come out of the plane and see which direction they're going, because they'll generally follow those lanes based on where they're headed out of the plane path. Sometimes they will try and switch it up and confuse you, but in most cases you can predict where your enemy is going to be and how many are going to be stacked on one side. 68 is to roll when as soon as the plane gate drops to get on the battlefield slightly faster. If you queue up a roll right when the gate drops, you'll be generally the first one out of the plane. 67 is going to be to swap weapons while you're on the field. Again, replacing your sidearm if possible is extremely valuable to do, as you can have two guns that sort of compensate for each other. There's really no reason not to as well. It's extremely useful. 66 is going to be to watch for grenade indicator colors. If the grenade indicator is in the white, meaning you won't take any damage at all. If it's in the red, it's in your range and will probably deal some damage to you. 65 is going to be not always thirsting to kill. Sometimes this is quite effective for draining lives, but sometimes you go for the player who's downed and you use your precious ammo on them rather than somebody who's actually up and can fight you, and that might cost you some extra lives. 64 is extremely useful, and this is listening for Saint's drone. If an enemy goes down and one of their enemies has a Saint, you can listen for the drone if the enemy you just downed is getting revived, and then go in and finish the kill. 63, similarly, if your enemy is playing Dahlia and they're linked with an enemy that might be getting revived, listen for a character quote, as you'll know if they got picked up or not. 62, you can undo purchases in your buy menu if you make a mistake or change your mind using Control-Z on PC, and it's something different on console, but a lot of people forget that you can actually undo purchases if you forget. If a round passes and you didn't undo your purchase, then you're stuck with it. 61 is using Dima effectively to force enemy mistakes. His explosive toolkit is very useful in respawn modes that will get enemies to break pressure if they have like a really nice formation and they're almost unbreakable. Dima is really good at disrupting that stuff. 60 is going to be using general context clues to help your decision making. This can be either on the scoreboard, this can be on the HUD or on the minimap as well, or even the kill feed, which we'll get to later, but context clues are unbelievably important. Even character quotes, as minuscule as they might be, are very important. 59, be sure to utilize your crouch when spraying at a particularly long distance, as this will tighten up your bloom a little bit and making your shots more accurate over time and with longer sprays. 58 is also going to be not thirsting kills immediately to delay pressure. So, for example, if you're taking a point, you down a few enemies, don't immediately kill them if you need time to take the point, because the quicker you kill them, the quicker they can get back in and then reapply pressure. So sometimes it's better just to leave them out of battle for a while you do whatever task you need to get done. 57, I'm going to pretty much always recommend using voice communication if you're playing Dahlia, because she's not going to be nearly as effective as she could be if you're not verbally communicating with the teammate that you're linking with. That's when she's at her best. 56, I've noticed oddly that turning up your audio a little bit if playing against a Lancer is really effective because she has much quieter movement, but if your audio's up slightly, you might be able to detect her even despite that slightly lower volume. 55 is going to be using your crouch walk to avoid detection. This is extremely effective if you're going on flake rounds and are trying to get behind your enemy to create pressure, but you don't want to be detected, as if you're just stomping around and rush right in, they might hear you ruining the entire flank. So crouch walking to avoid detection is so important as well. 54, in bomb plant game modes, you can actually listen for the planting sound if your enemy's on it. Sometimes you might not know if they're planting or if they're just holding the angle, but you can listen for the noise, so that can help your decision making going forward. 53 is a gunfight technique called bait and punish. Now you can pop around a corner, spray a few rounds, and that will make your enemy think you're pushing the aggressive play, usually burning their entire mag, and you just wait behind cover until that's empty, and then you go and get the easy pick. This is the easiest way to pick off players that are overly aggressive or, just really want the kill. 52 is going to be to utilize training mode, either the actual training grounds where you can do target practice or even just practice demolition to get familiar with the maps and different matchups and interactions. 51 is coordinating abilities with fellow rogues. So for example, if you're trying to revive a teammate, Saint throws out a drone, and you put a Vi toxic pool on your teammate to discourage the enemy from pushing and finishing off that kill, can save your life and will really help you win more games. 50 is a general team composition tip, but always having one anchor player, somebody who's going to play back and not take too many gunfight risk while your other teammates can be aggressive, being the anchor and generally the healer as well in case somebody who is playing aggressive goes down is definitely at the heart of every successful team. 49, the best way to handle clutches and disadvantage if it's just you and you're playing against some enemies and it's literally only you left, the best thing you can do is try to split them off and take individual gunfights. You literally won't be able to take them on your own with all 3 or 4 characters, but splitting them off individually through creative movement is the best thing you can do to stay alive. 48, in general, it's best not to peek the same angle twice, and especially if you take damage from that angle, as your enemy is way more likely to hold that angle if they do put shots on you because they got rewarded for it before. If you even switch up your angle slightly, you can, make them redetermine their aim, and that might actually win you the gunfight instead. 47 is going to be getting around pesky anvil shields with explosives. Now, you can get really creative with these with grenades and then banking them off walls or ceilings. Getting around anvils is sometimes really frustrating and annoying, but explosives I found is the best way to combat them. 46 is going to be shooting from the zip lines. Now, a lot of the maps do have zip lines, and so I feel like some people forget that you can shoot from them. Not only can you shoot the people that are using it, but while you're on it yourself, you can still aim and shoot, and you have pretty much all of your typical functionalities while on that zip line and having that increased movement. 45, on that same topic, is going to be utilizing all the map features that are provided to you. So zip lines, for example, are extremely effective. Even doors that can be manually opened or closed based on how you want to set up pressure and flanks and stuff like that. Utilizing and getting familiar with all of those interactable world environment items is very important in Rogue Company. 44 is going to be listening for enemy revive sounds. Now, typically you're going to hear like a small bandage noise if your enemy is reviving someone around the corner. This can also be used as bait. You can revive for a few seconds for that sound to initiate, making your enemy push, but you can, prepare yourself and have your gun up so that you can sort of bait them and pick them off. 43, oftentimes hipfire is your best option, and especially gun dependent. You don't always need to be ADS'd, as while you're aimed down the sights, in most situations you have less movement speed. Hipfire is oftentimes a lot more reliable than you might think. 42 is understanding your particular weapon's drop-off ranges. This can be seen in your buy menu or in your rogue's weapon loadout, and this is going to determine how far or close your weapon is going to be effective at, so this will determine basically how you position and engage in gunfights. 41, using glitch as a counterpick to very equipment-heavy enemies is extremely effective, especially if the map really fosters a playstyle of holding equipment and not breaking pressure. Glitch is really good at disrupting that stuff. 40 is going to be using Scorch to counterpick very fire-heavy enemies, so if they like to throw incendiary grenades or use any sort of fire-based attacks, Scorch is the best because she's completely immune to that sort of stuff, and if I've ran into a lot of teams that actually rely on that kind of playstyle, Scorch is absolutely a thorn in their side, so I highly recommend to counterpick in that sense. 39 is going to be use the perk that grants you more reload speed in respawn game modes. Because there are just more gunfights going on at once, reload speed is absolutely vital and making sure that your gun is always ready, and it's a fairly cheap perk as well, so I recommend that you invest in it. 38, after a lot of experience with Phantom, I've realized that upgrading your sniper to level 3 is pretty much never a good idea, because the only thing it does is nullify damage fall off, and there are very few interactions in the game where you're going to have that range where it really matters, especially if you're only playing in casual playlists. It pretty much doesn't matter, and I would pretty much stay at level 2 and invest the rest of your money in perks or other equipment. 37, you can jump while throwing grenades, or pretty much any other throwable for that matter, even melee weapons, for slightly more distance. This is good if you want to get just a little bit of an advantage in terms of distance on your throwable versus your enemies. I recommend jump throwing these. 36 is going to be to rotate and position your character, even to make it as hard as possible for an enemy to finish you off. Sometimes you'll get around cover with 1 HP left, and that was what you needed to survive the gunfight and maybe even get revived. Just making it as much of a pain for your enemy to kill you as humanly possible. 35 is going to be to not stand still or in one place for too long. This can lead easily to you getting flanked or just picked off with one easy shot. Keeping your movement unpredictable yet fluid is the best way for enemies to think twice before approaching you. 34, you can rush with your melee weapon swings to pick off high-risk characters. So for example, like Phantom or the Fixer, if they're, if you manage to get up close on them and you can break their cover, using melee weapons and they can't really do anything about it in a situation like that is an easy way to pick off these specialties. 33, the perk that prevents you from being revealed is pretty much matchup dependent. You should always pay attention to what your enemies are running along the first round to determine whether you should spend money on this perk or not, because sometimes your enemies aren't even going to bother to reveal you, and you just just wasted money on a perk that's going to do you nothing. But sometimes the enemy's going to rely on that completely, and you should all be running it if that's the case. 32 is going to be to repair armor often when using Headstrong. Now, they have changed it recently. If you've been playing the game for a bit, they allowed it to where you can now repair that armor after a little while. It used to only be a one-time use, but this is no longer the case. 31 is going to be utilizing your death cams to find enemies. So if you die, you can see a third-person perspective of the person that killed you, and you can actually use this to look around a little bit and get a more in-depth view of the situation and where enemies are positioned. Tip 30 is going to be to assist your teammates by holding angles with your gun while they're going for revives, as they are completely down and out for the count while picking up a teammate. Sometimes the pressure that you provide, or even just spraying a wall or an angle, will prevent the enemy and discourage them from pushing and allowing your teammate to get back up and end the battle. 29 is going to be to use trench and anvil combos to really hold some points down. If anvil has a shield up and basically the center of a trenched barbed wire on your team, he is almost impossible to push, and this can be your best like anchor play, and that allows you to play aggressive with your other teammates otherwise. 28 is especially important for ranked games and more competitive ones. I mean, it is useful and casual if you're just playing with a friend or something, but using callouts and being as specific as possible about where enemies are and what they're doing. Just communication generally is important, but getting like efficient with callouts is also going to benefit you greatly in the long run. 27 is going to be to put gadgets in extremely hard to reach or inconvenient places. So like Talon's Dart, for example, or Phantom's Revealer. If you put these in places where the enemy needs to risk their life in order to shoot them or break them, then that might be the thing that you either need to discourage them or allows you to get the easy kill. 26, knowing when to use your jump hop and knowing when to mantle is so important in this game, because sometimes mantling an object, if you're trying to get higher elevation, will cost you your entire life because your gun is down that entire time. However, you can jump on an object and immediately queue up another jump right when your feet touch the ground, and it maintains your momentum, and you can even pretty much keep your gun up the whole way. It's less risky. This tip is a little bit harder to implement, especially if you're a beginner player, but as more experienced players will begin to play Rogue Company, they know when to sort of double jump on an object and when to just mantle. 25, to avoid grenades, literally just be behind a sort of light cover without a line of sight with the grenade and just crouch, as if there is even any sort of obstacle or blockage in between you and the grenade, even if it looks like in reality you'd get blown up, if you stay crouched or if you're just behind that line of sight of the grenade, you usually will be fine like 9 times out of 10. 24 is when you're hit by a flash grenade to jump or start rolling. You need to make your movement as unpredictable as possible while you are completely incapacitated, for a lack of a better word. You can't really do much during this. You can try and shoot if you're going to predict your enemy really well when they come around the corner. Other than that, you want to buy as much time as possible to be back in the fight, and you can do this by jumping or rolling and just being slippery. 23 is going to be to practice leading shots slightly. You can do this in the training mode or to hit moving targets. This is really useful when trying to learn a new gun and sort of figure out how it works. Highly recommend trying this in the training mode, and this allows you to essentially use anything in the arsenal. 22, there was a brand new setting that was implemented not long ago that is an auto pickup feature, and this will grab equipment and items on the battlefield that otherwise you could pick up and utilize. Now, to be honest, I don't play with this on because I think sometimes it's better to make deliberate choices about what you should and should not pick up, and I'm going to leave that up to my own discretion. But if you want to have auto pickup on, if you don't think you can grab things quickly, I would recommend turning this on, especially on like console, if you don't think you can get to those items in a fast manner. Tip 21 is going to be using smoke screens for revives. Now, this is obviously good for blocking lines of sight and just making flanks. It's also really good for just dropping on a teammate and picking them up. Even phantom smoke or like even the fixer, any of these smoke grenades can be useful for just literally obscuring vision and picking up enemies. Now, of course, with the fixer, you have to be careful that he's going to use his thermal vision, but that aside, it's a really useful technique. Tip 20, when an enemy is healing another teammate, you always want to shoot the person that is up and is doing the healing first. I see a lot of newer players making the mistake where they just kind of shoot the guy who's down first to get the easy kill and then going for the guy who has a gun, but this is completely opposite to how you should prioritize them. And that leads nicely into tip number 19, which is just generally prioritizing targets better. Not even when it necessarily is in the case of downed players versus not, but even just who has how much health and also the gun that you're using, how much damage it's going to output. This is really going to make real-time decisions and how you should prioritize your targets. There's nothing wrong with picking off the downed player if it doesn't impede your ability to still deal with and effectively take care of the ones that are still up. Number Number 18 is a pretty difficult tip to implement, but sort of counting your enemy's bullets is honestly not a bad thing to do. Now, again, this requires you to have a knowledge of the guns and what rogues use what weapons. And I also don't mean to literally count how many bullets they're shooting, but like if you realize that the weapon they're using has like 30 rounds in the mag and they've burned like 15 or 20, they probably don't have much left and you will be way more advantaged in the fight if you do decide to push them. 17 is going to be to use the perk that increases your movement speed after getting hit. This is probably one of my favorite perks in the game. I didn't like it a lot at first, but then I quickly realized how effective it actually is. It can skew your enemy's aim and make it so that you're an extremely slippery target. I highly recommend using this perk, especially in respawn modes too. 16 is going to be utilizing your radar and also your map for context clues. This can give you so much information that I feel like most players don't take advantage of. Pulling up your entire minimap is also pretty useful to get almost exact locations on where your enemies are going to be as you get a full-scale view of the map battlefield that you're in. Tip 15 is going to be pretty much for PC players only, but turning off your mouse acceleration, if applicable, is so important. Mouse acceleration is really going to hurt your ADS and just your overall, I would say, aim in this game, and I would strongly recommend taking it off. It's just not something you want to have on. Number 14 is a different kind of just all-around tip. Avoid tilting as much as possible. This is not really a gameplay tip, but it kind of is, right? If you're tilting and you're getting extremely upset at your game, it's in most cases going to cause you to play worse, thus making you tilt more. It's a positive feedback loop I would try to avoid. Remember, it's only a game. Tip 13, utilizing running jump shots in close quarters is a great way to skew your enemy's aim and take them out around a corner. Now, the best way to do this I found is to essentially put a couple shots, pull back, let them maybe spray a few rounds or two, let them take cover again, and then come around the corner sprinting, jumping while spraying, and you'll usually get the kill if executed right. Tip number 12 is another kind of general one, but I rarely recommend playing your enemies and not necessarily the characters. Really try to focus in on and pay attention on your enemy's habits and exploit them as much as you can. A character can be entirely effective or not effective at all based on the user, so if you want the most success, you got to pay attention to your enemy's habits and play that instead. Number 11 is a tip I always recommend in pretty much any video game, but especially in Rogue Company, to avoid tunnel vision. Sometimes there's a lot going on at once in Rogue Company, and it's so easy to get invested in one individual gunfight that you lose all of the context clues and other happenings around you, and that could ultimately lead to your demise. Tunnel vision is extremely important to avoid, and you have to remind yourself constantly to not get too entranced in one particular engagement. Number 10 is going to sound obvious, but just communicating properly in every single way, whether you're using voice comms or not, doing your part as an individual to provide the most amount of information to your teammates is going to pay off so greatly in the long run. Obviously, verbal communication is going to be the best, and doing that effectively is nice, but doing it in any way you can, any way, shape, or form is going to be wonderful. Number 9 is going to be to take your option to get comfortable with maps. And again, you can jump into custom games or like practice demolition to really get familiar with all of the maps, because I would say that your success is like maybe 30 or 40% determined by map knowledge and where the angles are. Obviously, that doesn't account for every interaction or success and failure in game, but a large part will be decided by how well you are familiar with a map. Number 8 is going to be learning individual matchups. And again, this comes a lot with game experience, which you can really only get just by playing and figuring it out. But some interactions that are just like particularly useful to know. Lancer is a pretty easy counter pick to Phantom. Phantom is a pretty easy counter pick to Chalk, stuff like that. Also, recognizing the enemy that you're going up against and what abilities that their character is capable of is also extremely vital. Number 7, if you want to, you can enable Tritanopia in your colorblind settings, and a lot of people tend to use this as it makes some things stand out more a bit than others. It can make your game also just look a little nicer color-wise. Some people prefer it. In this game, I don't think it's nearly as game-breaking or effective as it is in other games. You can experiment it and see if it's for you, but I don't necessarily recommend it to every player. It is case-dependent. Tip number 6 is just a fundamental, and this is really learning your crosshair placement, having your crosshairs up and pretty much always at a reasonable level where you can easily snap aim to any target if they happen to appear on you. This will come a little bit with map knowledge, where if you know where the angles are, but in general, as a rule of thumb, having your crosshairs at headshot level or even just neck or body shot is very effective. Throwing your crosshairs everywhere, either way too high up or too low down, is going to cost you a lot of gunfights, and you might not even realize why you're losing them. Tip number 5 is going to be utilizing the B-hop, and we went went into detail on another tips and tricks video on how this works. The movement technique is essentially queuing up a hop as soon as your feet touch the ground from an initial jump. This can also change the way that your character sounds, and it's not necessarily quieter, but sometimes it's like it will throw off your enemies and they don't really think they're getting pushed, or you can cover a lot more distance when they think they have time instead of just, putting out regular footsteps. But it's good for getting around the map quickly and jumping over objects and stuff. Just something I recommend to implement in due process. Tip number 4 is going to be getting really comfortable with all of your key or controller binds and also fine-tuning your sensitivity. Now, there's different techniques for doing this, whether you're on a mouse or a controller, and regardless of what people might have you think, there is no one universally best sensitivity. In my opinion, what it comes down to really is muscle memory. You want to have your sensitivity reasonable. I generally play a really high sensitivity compared to most people in games, but you can quickly learn that and that's just my play style, but you can quickly learn that if you develop your muscle memory to attain that. Tip number 3 is going to be crouch spamming, and this is another tip that is pretty easy to implement that we went over before. Crouch spamming is unbelievably effective in close quarters combat scenarios, and it can cause your enemy to miss a couple of vital shots, and especially if you're at a health disadvantage, that actually might win you the gunfight, so it's important to implement that too. Moving on, and tip number 2 is going to be keeping an eye on the kill feed. Now, this is really important, as a lot of people just think the kill feed is just like an objective indicator of what's happening, and that's true, but it's also like your best notion on how you should make plays and who's down and basically what's going on. It gives you more map awareness and just in-game sense. There are almost no situations in which not looking at your kill feed is beneficial. Just even glancing at it from time to time and using that as context clues to communicate with your teammates it's just gonna overall increase your communication and individual performance and effectiveness as your rogue. But finally, guys, coming today at the number 1 spot, one of the most effective tips I have for you in Rogue Company is really getting good at utilizing your role in every direction. Implementing it in gunfights is just like that. It's the bread and butter of this game. If you can put out damage while making it super hard for your enemy to track you down and put out damage, that's the name of the game, really. That's how you're going to win. Spraying an enemy and immediately rolling away is the safest way to space yourself and not get punished for maybe whiffing a few shots or peeking angle for a little bit longer than you otherwise should have. Again, it is by far the most useful tool to get good at and proficient with, and your role is probably the most like intricate part of your kit, arguably. So anyways, guys, those are 100 tips and tricks for Rogue Company to learn everything. I really hope you guys did enjoy today's video, and if you made it all the way to the end, first of all, you are an absolute legend, and please let me know by leaving a smiley face in the comment section if you made it all the way here. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I really appreciate it. If you did enjoy, please make sure to give it a like rating before you go, and make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel as well. And you can go follow me over on Twitch, where I stream almost every single day. Link to that is in the description below. But other than that, guys, hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching once again, and I'll see you all on the next stream or the next video. Take it easy, everybody, and peace out.